Welcome back to another episode of Opal Wave MTG, a channel dedicated to exploring power levels in EDH and helping you tune your deck to your meta. I'm your host Jacob, and today we're going to be looking at Nicol Bolas the Ravager, which is a Grixis aligned dragon, Elder Dragon 4/4 with flying. When Nicol Bolas the Ravager enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card, and 7 mana, including Grixis colors, blue, black, and red, exile Nicol Bolas the Ravager, then return him to the battlefield transformed under his owner's control. Activate this ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. And when you flip him, he turns into Nicol Bolas the Arisen, which is a planeswalker. You got +2, draw 2 cards. -3, Nicol Bolas the Arisen deals 10 damage to target creature or planeswalker. -4, put target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard into the battlefield under your control. And -12, exile all but the bottom card of target player's library, and he starts at 7 loyalty. A lot of really cool utility that we get from this planeswalker / creature, and this was recommended by Justin Daw, so a huge shout out to you for being the first person to request a deck tech. I definitely went down the rabbit hole when I was brewing for this commander, so much so that I have 4 decks to present today instead of the usual 3. 2 of them are going to be in the Skirmish power level, 1 in the Battle power level, and of course 1 for the Glory version. And essentially I was charged with keeping it on theme with like Nicol Bolas Tribal. So as we move up in the power level, we'll see how we can still maintain a theme and also power up our decks. As usual, the deck lists are in the description below, and with that, let's go ahead and get started. For the first Skirmish version of Nicol Bolas, it's purely on theme, so anything that has to do with Nicol Bolas, whether it be in the artwork or maybe a character that has things to do with Nicol Bolas, or if Nicol Bolas is in the flavor text, we have added it to this deck, so it's completely it's all Nicol Bolas. And so with the Planeswalkers, you've got Liliana Vest, who Nicol Bolas actually creates the contract that she has with the 4 demons. Then we've got Nicol Bolas Dragon God, Nicol Bolas God-Pharaoh, Nicol Bolas Planeswalker, Nicol Bolas the Deceiver, and we've also got Tezzeret, Agent of Bolas, who definitely helps Nicol Bolas on whatever plane he needs him on at any given point to get his plan going. Then we've got the creatures, Augur of Bolas, classic, Disciple of Bolas. This card is really good, actually. So when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice another creature, you gain X life and draw X cards, where X is that creature's power. And you can really draw a lot of cards off of this. And we've got God Eternal Bontu, who when it enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice any number of other permanents to draw that many cards. So another really strong draw effect that we get since Nicol Bolas, essentially resurrected these God Eternals to do his bidding. We've added them in here. We've also got God Eternal Kefnet, who can copy our instants and sorceries that we cast, since we have like I said, a decent amount of them. Mindclaw Shaman, we've got Nicol Bolas in the flavor text here, and it's also interesting since we can steal our opponent's instants and sorceries, so definitely on flavor with Nicol Bolas here. Then we've got Neheb the Eternal, who produces a bunch of mana in the post-combat main phase. This is what Glory looks like. This is actually a Skirmish deck, but we'll get to Glory eventually. Then we've got just the regular OG Nicol Bolas. It's a pretty heavy casting cost, but we want Nicol Bolas in this deck since it's going to be themed. Then we've got Rakamar from the Shards of Alara, and Nicol Bolas spent a good deal of time on shards on the plane of Alara to get a lot of his machinations going and kind of steal the mana sources from that plane. And we've got a quote from him: "The finest pawns are those with pawns of their own," which is really interesting because this creature creates more creatures. Then we've got the Locust God, the Scarab God, and the Scorpion God, all more or less pawns of the Nicol Bolas. Also, just pretty strong cards in their own right. So, and then the last creature we got is Zealot of the God-Pharaoh. It's just the mana outlet to deal damage to an opponent or a planeswalker, but it is definitely on theme with Nicol Bolas Tribal. Moving on to the sorceries, we've got Apex of Power, and this is on, I believe, Dominaria, where he's trying to, ascend and gain all the knowledge in the world. Then we've got Cruel Ultimatum from, again, Shards of Alara, one of the ultimatums, and it's got Nicol Bolas in the artwork, so really cool there. We've got Crux of Fate, where Nicol Bolas and Ugin are fighting. We can either trail dragons or trail non-dragons, so some decent flexibility that can let us keep our, Nicol Bolas, either Nicol Bolas really. And then we've got Dark Intimations, which, each opponent sacks a creature, planeswalker, and discards a card. Then return a creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand, then draw a card. So some decent value on this card. We can also exile it when we cast a planeswalker spell, and that a Nicol Bolas planeswalker spell, and that Nicol Bolas planeswalker spell will enter with an additional loyalty counter on it. Unfortunately, we don't cast the planeswalker side of Nicol Bolas, so it will not get an extra counter on it when we flip it. We can't exile it to give him another counter, unfortunately, but we can do it with any of the other 4 Nicol Bolas that we have. So then we've got Finale of Eternity, which features Liliana and, again, Nicol Bolas during War of the Spark, when Liliana is essentially trying to defeat Nicol Bolas so she doesn't have to deal with her contract anymore. Finale of Promise has Nicol Bolas in the artwork again, and again, since we've got a lot of instants and sorceries, this can actually be really nice, especially if we get that X up to 10. We can get some pretty crazy interactions going on here. Then we've got Fraying Omnipotence, which is more or less the opposite of Apex of Power, and so the Great Mending basically took away a lot of the pre-mending Sparks planeswalkers. It made the Sparks worse for them, and also any future planeswalkers that gain Sparks, their planeswalkers, they weren't as strong, because generally those planeswalkers were considered to be gods more or less, and so Nicol Bolas, his whole thing is to gain that power back and to rule the multiverse, essentially. So really cool artwork here, basically showing Nicol Bolas losing his power, and really sets up his whole thing where he wants to gain his power back and basically remember all of the knowledge that he had from before. Hour of Devastation, again, we've got some Nicol Bolas in the artwork. Deal 5 damage to each creature and each non-Bolas planeswalker, and all creatures lose indestructible until the end of turn. So pretty decent board wipe, actually, and also doesn't hit any of our Bolas planeswalkers that we're going to be using. And we've got Slave of Bolas, just a classic gain control of a target creature. It gains haste, and you also sack it at the end of the turn, so your opponent doesn't get it back. Very evil. And then the final sorcery, we have Torment of Hailfire, which features Nicol Bolas in the artwork, and it's also just a really strong game-ending spell if you can put enough into the X. Moving on into the instance, we've got Commence the Endgame. Pretty cool artwork here. 6 mana, it's pretty hefty cost. Can't be countered, which is nice. And draw 2 cards, then amass X, where X is the number of cards in your hand. Cower in Fear. Creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 until the end of turn. Cool way to kind of get rid of all those pesky token dork type decks. And it's also got some nice flavor text with Nicol Bolas. Magma Quake. Deal X damage to each creature without flying and each planeswalker. So just another board wipe that features Nicol Bolas in the flavor text. Soul Manipulation. Another counter target creature spell. Return target creature from your graveyard to your hand. So some nice flexibility with this card, as well as some flavor text on Nicol Bolas. And finally, Tyrant Scorn. Destroy target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less, or return target creature to its owner's hand. The hero with the magic sword slays the dragon. Not this time. Then we're moving on to the artifacts. Arcane Signet, just a classic ramp spell. Commander's Fear, another classic ramp spell. Crook of Condemnation, card from the Amonkhet block, where we can exile players' graveyards. Mentions the God-Pharaoh in the flavor text. Of course, we've got Bolas' Citadel. We definitely want that card in the stack. Gem of Becoming. We can sacrifice it. We get an island, a swamp, and a mountain. We reveal those, put them to our hand. So basically just a way for us to guarantee land drops. Not the best in terms of ramp, but we want to stay on theme with our Nicol Bolas travel, so pretty sweet. Gilded Lotus. I really like this card when you have some high-costed stuff, since this is going to propel you from 5 mana up to 8, especially since Nicol Bolas wants to hit that 7 mana so you can flip him into the Planeswalker side. And even if Nicol Bolas gets removed, you'll definitely have enough mana to recast him the next time, and the activation cost doesn't increase with, commander tax, so that's always nice. Then we have the Statue of the God-Pharaoh. Spells your opponent's cast cost 2 more, and at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses 1 life. This card seems pretty unassuming at first, but all of your opponent's spell costing 2 more is kind of a big deal. The player's losing 1 life, it doesn't really matter. But that 2 extra costs on all your spells can definitely put a wrench on a lot of players' plans. So we've got a few more ramp spells. And then we've got the Planar Bridge, which is another item that Nicol Bolas wanted to use so he could transfer his army. And then we've got the Immortal Sun, and while Jace was trying to use this to trap Nicol Bolas on the plane of Ixalan, Bolas actually gained control of this and used it to trap the Planeswalkers on the plane of Ravnica so he could harvest their sparks from him. Then we've got Throne of the God-Pharaoh, which pretty obvious include. It's not the best in terms of our deck. We don't really have a good way to go wide, but we want to stay on theme, so it doesn't really matter too much. Then we've got Visage of Bolas, which 4 mana ramp essentially. Doesn't ramp us a bunch, it's only 1, so it's not a really great value. But when it enters, we can search our library and our graveyard for a card named Nicol Bolas the Deceiver, reveal it, put it into our hand, and if we search our library that way, we can shuffle it. So a way for us to get Nicol Bolas the Deceiver into our hand, and basically we can recast it again. Pretty nice. Moving on to the enchantments, we've got Blood Reckoning with some pretty sweet flavor text here. There is no greater folly than standing against me. Then we've got In Bolas' Clutches, Enchanted Permanent. You control Enchanted Permanent, and Enchanted Permanent is legendary. And the last enchantment we have is the Eldest Reborn. It's a saga with each opponent sacks a creature or planeswalker. The second part, each opponent discards a card, and the third is put target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So I really like this card, very powerful, especially when you get to reanimate something from anyone's graveyard, planeswalker or creature. Moving on to the lands, we're in a 3-color deck, so we've got a good bit of some dual lands, whether they enter the battlefield tapped or not. Not really a big deal to us since we're playing in the Skirmish power level. And then another land I'd like to point out is the Tyrite Sanctum, which taps to add a colorless, pay 2, target legendary creature becomes a god in addition to its other types, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and pay 4, sacrifice Tyrite Sanctum, put an indestructible counter on target god. And since Nicol Bolas' whole thing is to become this super planeswalker and essentially become a god, I thought it was really fitting that we actually turn one of our Nicol Bolas creatures into a god and really hit that flavor point. So with the second Skirmish version, instead of doing just Nicol Bolas, like only Nicol Bolas themed, I decided to go with basically amassing Nicol Bolas' Dreadhorde army. So a lot of our cards are going to deal with the amass mechanic, which is put to put a +1/+1 counter on an army you control. If you don't control an army, create a 0/0 black zombie army creature token first. So essentially with the amass mechanic, we're going to try and make a huge zombie army token and then swing at people with it. So we've got Angrath, Captain of Chaos, whose only ability is -2, amass 2, and then creatures you control have menace. Then we've got Liliana, Dreadhorde General, who doesn't have the amass mechanic, but she is still the Dreadhorde General, so we've got her in here for the flavor. We've got the Nicol Bolas still, just to stay on theme with our Nicol Bolas. And then our creatures are pretty different here. This is the main change that happened between the two versions of this deck. So we've got a Cursed Horde, which attacking zombies gain indestructible until the end of turn. Then we've got a few creatures that when they enter the battlefield, they amass. So Dreadhorde Twins, Eternal Skylord, Grim Initiate amasses when it dies, Herald of Dreadhorde amasses when it dies, Invading Manticore amasses when it enters. Then we've still got the God Eternal Bantu, God Eternal Kefnet, the Neheb, the Eternal. They're all zombies, so it's still pretty decently on theme, and they all appear in his army, so really cool here. Then we've got Soul Diviner. Tap it, remove a counter from an artifact, creature, land, or planeswalker you control to draw a card. Really decent card draw, actually, and you know, if we don't have one of our planeswalkers out, we can remove counters from the token that we amass and get some card advantage there. And some other interesting synergy we get, stuff like Gleaming Overseer gives hexproof and menace to zombie tokens. Dreadhorde Twins gives zombie tokens trample. The Eternal Skylord gives the zombie token flying. And then we've got the Spark Reaver, another way for us to draw cards. Pay 3, sacrifice a creature or planeswalker, you gain 1 life and draw a card. So if there's a board wiper, you're going to lose something anyway. Definitely a nice way for us to get some card advantage off of those things. Sorceries, for the most part, are almost the same. Bleeding Edge, another way for us to amass and potentially remove something. Callous Dismissal is a bounce spell that amasses. Command the Dreadhorde, definitely on flavor. And also just a really powerful reanimation spell depending on how much life you have. Enter the God Eternals definitely makes more sense in this deck since it amasses 4, pretty strong amass card. Invade the City amasses where X is the number of instants and sorceries in our graveyard. Relentless Advance amasses 3. It's not the best card, but we're on theme here, so we're just going to put it in. The Elder Spell, quintessential card in the lore of Nicol Bolas, especially during the Dreadhorde invasion of Ravnica, so we're going to keep it in. Then we've still got the Torment of Hellfire, a great way for us to end the game, and it's also very on theme with Nicol Bolas in general. Then we've got Widespread Brutality, which amasses 2. Then the army you amass deals damage equal to its power to each non-army creature. So definitely a really strong way for us to wipe the board, depending on how big our army token is. Moving on to the instance, I added Cancel because it was kind of bothering me that we didn't have some way to, just as a catch-all answer. We have the Crush Descent still, but it's 4 mana and they can still pay 2 to have it not happen. So it amasses 2, so pretty, you know, on flavor here, but I just wanted something that could just hit anything and not have to worry about whether it's a non-creature or a creature or any of that kind of stuff. Commence the endgame definitely makes more sense in this deck as well, since we can you know, amass equal to the amount of cards in our hand. Lazotep Plating amasses 1, and then you and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn, so pretty good protection. And moving on to the artifacts, we've got the Bolas' Citadel still, very strong card, very on flavor. Gem of Becoming, Visage of Bolas. Throne of the God-Pharaoh is another card that makes a little bit more sense in this deck since we have more creatures in general. And the God-Pharaoh's gift actually has some really interesting synergy. So a lot of these guys say zombie tokens you control have trample. So if you use the God-Pharaoh's gift to reanimate any of our zombies, they are going to get the benefits from these guys, giving them flying, trample, hexproof, and menace, all that good jazz. And then moving on into our enchantments, we've got the Dreadhorde Invasion. Definitely want to have this card in here. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and amass 1. and whenever a zombie token you control attacks with power 6 or greater, it gains lifelink until the end of turn. Really great way for us to just continually amass every turn and have that inevitability where eventually the army is going to overtake you. And the last card is Necro Duality. Doesn't really have too much to do in general with the Dreadhorde army or Nicol Bolas himself, but since a lot of our stuff is zombies, we get a lot of value out of this. So whenever a non-token zombie enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of that creature. And another really nice synergy is that we have a decent amount of these guys that when they enter, they amass. So they enter the battlefield, you amass, but then you also make a copy of it with Necro Duality, and you get to amass again. So stuff like Dreadhorde Twins and Eternal Skylord will essentially be amassing for 4, and we make tokens that are those zombies. So the zombie tokens that we create of the Dreadhorde Twins and the Eternal Skylord, Gleaming Overseer, they're going to get that the buff from that. So it's going to be really nice. Moving on to the lands. The lands are pretty much unchanged. They're all, dual lands, and our curve and our mana spread still works really nicely with the land base we have here, and it's a pretty cheap and easy land base to set up in general. So moving on to the battle version of Nicol Bolas, we've upgraded our planeswalkers a little bit here, and we've also reduced some of the lesser Nicol Bolases in the deck. So, I mean, it's a lot of high costed stuff, and we want them to have a little bit more oomph to them, you know what I'm saying? We still have the Nicol Bolas Dragon God, which is actually going to be one of our combos now. So if you have a Jace Cunning Castaway and a Chandra Acolyte of Flame, what you can do is if you get Nicol Bolas up to 5, you minus Nicol Bolas, and you make 2 more Nicol Bolas Dragon Gods using Jace Cunning Castaways -5. So the -5 is create 2 tokens that are copies of Jace Cunning Castaway, except they're not legendary. So when a card is self-referential like Jace's last ability is, and you use it on something else, it always refers to itself. So Nicol Bolas is going to create 2 more Nicol Bolas Dragon Gods. And from there, you use one of the new Nicol Bolases to activate the first loyalty ability of Chandra Acolyte of Flame, which is put a loyalty counter on each red planeswalker you control. So from here, Nicol Bolas is going to proliferate both of the Nicol Bolases you just created, and then the second Nicol Bolas is going to -5 because it just proliferated up to 5 with Jace. So you use the -5 on Jace, and you create 2 more Nicol Bolases. So now you have 3 Nicol Bolases on the battlefield. From here, you repeat this over and over and over again until you have an infinite amount of Nicol Bolases. You then pass the turn, and the odds of someone being able to deal with an infinite amount of Nicol Bolases is pretty low. And then when you move to your next turn, you just continue to uptake the Nicol Bolas with its own +1 ability. Draw a card. Each opponent exiles a card from their hand or a permanent they control. So essentially, you will exile everyone's hands and everyone's permanents. And if a player wants to keep playing, good on them. They've got good mental, but you're probably going to win the game at that point. You can also perform this combo with Nicol Bolas, Jace, and the Chain Veil. So you activate the Chain Veil, and so essentially you can plus up Nicol Bolas and then -5 him, making 2, and then you can plus up with his own ability and then -5, and just continue to do this over and over and over again. And this doesn't need you to pass the turn and give everyone a rotation to potentially deal with it. Instead, this will immediately draw pretty much your entire deck, and each opponent is going to exile all the permanents they have in their hand, or all the cards in their hand and all the permanents they have on the battlefield. Moving on to the creatures, we've got the Augur of Bolas, the Mindclaw Shaman. They're both actually pretty decent cards. Being able to steal instant sorcery from an opponent is really nice. And again, we've got a decent amount of instant sorceries in our deck, so Augur of Bolas is going to hit something most of the time. Still got the Rockamar. This is actually going to be an outlet for an infinite mana combo we have in the deck with Lithoform Engine and Dramatic Reversal. So if we can make 3 mana total with some of our rocks. Gilded Lotus makes this really easy. We can copy the Dramatic Reversal while it's on the stack with the Lithoform Engine by tapping it and paying 2. And the Lithoform Engine is going to untap it and your mana rocks. And from there, you can continue to copy the Dramatic Reversal and make infinite mana. And with that mana, we've got a few outlets, one of them being the Rock Amara, where you can continue to make infinite 3/1s with haste. We can draw most of the cards in our deck while making a bunch of 1/1s with the Locust God's draw ability. The Scarab God can just reanimate all the creatures in our opponent's graveyards or our own graveyards. Pretty decent there. We've got the Finale Revelation, which we can sink a bunch of mana into, draw a lot of cards in our deck, and find some of our win cons. Torment of Hailfire. You know, if you put 1 billion mana into Torment of Hailfire, your opponents are going to die. I'd be surprised if they didn't, outside of very few cards like Angel's Grace or something like that. And then we've got Yawgmoth Thran-Vegetian, who isn't really Nicol Bolas themed, but he's got that last ability where you discard a card and proliferate. And since we've got a decent amount of Planeswalkers in here, he will definitely let us, ult our Planeswalkers a little bit faster. Moving on to the sorceries, still got stuff like Deliver Unto Evil, Deep Analysis, Contentious Plans. Cruel Ultimatum is again a pretty nice big end spell. Command the Dreadhorde, a really good reanimate spell. Talked about it before. Siphon Mind, each player discards a card. For each card your opponents discard this way, you draw a card, which is really nice. We've got the Windfall to reset hands, and the Narset, so we can basically strip our opponent's hands and giving us some more gas. Really nice interaction there. Grim Tutor, just another tutor. Damnation, a great board wipe, and Torment of Hailfire again as one of our outlets, and just a win con in general. With the Instant Sorceries, we've definitely made some decent upgrades, since the ones that are Nicol Bolas themed in general are kind of specific and overcosted in some instances. So yeah, we've just made some upgrades here. Mystical Tutor, Vam Tutor, really great tutors again. And Croesus Charm. It's a Grixis spell that has Dragon's Hand in it. It's not, I'm pretty sure it's Croesus and not Nicol Bolas, but I thought it would be cool to include it. The artifacts, we still have the Crook of Condemnation to deal with our opponent's graveyards. Bolas' Citadel, again, really powerful card in pretty much any context. And the Chain Veil and Lithoform Engine as our combo pieces. Rings of Bright Hearth is really cool. If you activate an ability, you can pay 2, and if you do, you copy that ability. So since we have Planeswalkers in here with a lot of activated abilities, we can use the rings to copy those abilities, get some extra value out of those. Really nice. And then last but not least, the Eldest Reborn in our enchantments. I just really like this card. A lot of value since we are kind of a grindy deck. This card is really nice, especially since we can reanimate a creature or planeswalker from any graveyard on the last tick. In the lands, definitely removed some of the lands that are entering tapped no matter what, with some lands that can potentially enter untapped. A few more basics, just so we can get more lands that enter untapped, and since our ramp is a little bit better, we can afford some of the monocolor stuff, and we have plenty of dual lands, so I'm not too worried about that. We got shock lands, on-color fetch lands, and a Karn's Bastion. Pay 4 and proliferate. Again, since we've got a decent amount of planeswalkers, being able to proliferate with the Karn's Bastion can definitely come in handy. Before moving on to the glory version of Nicol Bolas the Ravager, if you enjoy my content and you feel like you've gained a little bit more perspective on power levels in EDH, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment below letting me know what commander you'd like to see me brew next. It was really cool to have someone recommend a commander, and I had a lot of fun doing it, so I hope you guys enjoyed. And finally, moving on to the glory version of Nicol Bolas, which is essentially cEDH. We still kept our win conditions more or less on theme with Nicol Bolas. We've still got the Nicol Bolas with the Jace and the Chain Veil. We don't have the Chandra, just to kind of make some more room for other good stuff in the deck. We've got Ashiok and Narset as kind of ways to deny our opponents from either tutoring or drawing cards respectively, and Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, and the Thassa's Oracle, so we can win with the Demonic Consultation and or Tainted Pact. Really compact combo in blue and black in general. Onto the creatures, we've got Baron, Master Wizard, which is going to be a combo piece with Dockside Extortionist. So if you have a treasure count of 6, you can produce infinite mana. And how you do this is, so you have your Baron out and you cast Dockside. Dockside enters the battlefield, and assuming you have a treasure count of 6, you'll make 6 treasures. Then you sacrifice one of the treasures and pay 2 mana with the other 2 treasures. So you've used 3 of those treasures so far to bounce the Dockside Extortionist back to your hand. And then from there, you can use 2 more treasures to recast your Dockside. So that leaves you with 1 treasure remaining. You can loop this infinite amount of times until you have an arbitrarily large amount of mana. And from there, we can cast Nicol Bolas. And once we cast Nicol Bolas, we will activate Nicol Bolas's ability and transform him into Nicol Bolas the Arisen. From there, we will +2 our Nicol Bolas and draw 2 cards. From there, we're going to activate Baron, and we are going to sacrifice Nicol Bolas. Since Baron says sacrifice a permanent, we are going to sacrifice Nicol Bolas, and you can return whatever you want to your hand at that point. Most likely going to be your Dockside. And from there, since you have infinite mana, you can continue to recast your Nicol Bolas over and over and over again, and continue to draw out your deck until you find one of your other win cons. If you're drawing out your deck, you can use the Jace or the Thassa's. You don't even need the Consultation anymore, or just set up your Nicol Bolas Dragon God Jace Cunning Castaway combo. We've got the Consecrated Sphinx with the Amonkhet art. Really strong card. You get a few turns with this out, and you're just going to generate so much card advantage. It's going to be really hard to deal with you. Dark Confidant, Dauthi Boardwalker, both really strong cards. Confidant gives you some nice card advantage, and Dauthi, great way to deal with graveyard shenanigans and potentially win counterspell wars, since you can use them to cast the spells that you exile with. Gilded Drake, fantastic for stealing our opponent's stuff if they have really integral cards or creatures that they need for their game plan. Imperial Recruiter can tutor for Dockside, Baron, or Magda if we want to find more pieces for our combos. Malevolent Hermit, I really like this card. Deals with our opponent's non-creature spells and makes our non-creature spells uncounterable on the flip side of him. Opposition Agent, again, a really great card for stopping our opponents from tutoring their libraries. We've got Phantasmal Image. You can use this to make another Dockside if you really need to. If someone Gilded Drakes you, you can use Phantasmal Image to copy a Gilded Drake and take more stuff. And then you've also got Spellseeker and again the Thassa's Oracle. With the sorceries, we've got the Demonic Tutor with the really fancy Nicol Bolas artwork. Diabolic Intent with the Amonkhet frame, where you sack a creature to search your library for a card. Gamble, Imperial Seal, we've got Toxic Deluge, just a fantastic board wipe, and Windfall again, in case we get some of those really fast mana starts like Mana Crypt plus a land, or if we have a Narset out, we can just strip our opponent's hands essentially. Moving on to the instants, it's kind of hard for us to stay on theme more or less, since we do want to keep up to the standards that people would expect if we sit down on the cEDH table. So we've definitely upgraded our interaction package, and if you think about it, Nicol Bolas would want to use the absolute most powerful things at his disposal. So if you want to keep it in theme in that way, we definitely can do it. Dark Ritual has the nice Armorcat frame with the horns to keep in theme with our Nicol Bolas. We got the Demonic Consultation and the Tainted Pact again for our Thassa's Oracle combo. Siphon Insight, so we can rip stuff from our opponent's libraries. And again, just a lot of really efficient interaction. In our artifacts, we've got the Bolas' Citadel, but now we are using it as part of our combo. So we've got the Aetherflux Reservoir as well as the Sensei's Divining Top. And how this combo works is you tap your Sensei's Top to draw a card, and you put Sensei's Top on top of your library. And then with Bolas' Citadel, you can pay 1 life to cast the Sensei's from the top of your library. And then you'll trigger your Aetherflux Reservoir and you'll gain a life. You continue to do this over and over and over again until you gain enough life with Aetherflux Reservoir to shoot your opponents with the second ability, pay 50 life, deal 50 damage to target creature or player. So a really nice way for us to stay on theme and have a win condition with our Bolas' Citadel. We've got the Cloudstone Curio, which is another combo piece with our Dockside. So if we have a treasure count of 5, you can continue to bounce Dockside and Magda back and forth. And once you have an infinite amount of treasures, Magda has sacrificed 5 treasures to search your library for an artifact or dragon card. So we get our infinite treasures going, and then we sacrifice our treasures. And since our Bolas' Citadel combo is all artifacts, we can just tutor for some build Bolas' Citadel, Aetherflux Reservoir, and the Sensei's Divining Top, and just win from there. So really strong interaction with the Cloudstone. I like it a lot. Then we've also upgraded our ramp with a lot of the free stuff: Chrome Mox, Mox Opal, Mox Diamond, Mana Crypt, all that good jazz, and a Wishclaw Talisman, really powerful tutor, and of course the Chain Veil as one of our combo pieces that we talked about earlier. Enchantments, we've got the Counterbalance with the really cool Amonkhet art. So whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may reveal the top card of your library. If you do, counter that spell if it has the same converted mana cost as the revealed card. And since we're using Sensei's Divining Top as one of our combo pieces, we're going to get a little bit of extra mileage out of it with the Counterbalance. So there's a lot of 0, 1, 2, 3 mana spells going around in the cEDH format. So it's in response to the Counterbalance trigger, you can use Sensei's Top to manipulate whatever card is on top of your library. And if your opponent casts a 1 CMC spell, it gets even better, because you can look at the top 3, and if you don't have a 1 CMC spell to put on top, you can activate Top to draw a card and put Sensei's Top on top of your library, which will then counter the 1 CMC spell. So really cool interaction between these 2 cards, very powerful. And then we've got the Mystic Remora, the Rhystic Study, and the Necropotence, all extremely powerful forms of card draw in the context of cEDH and just in general. And if you notice, we don't have the Underworld Breach in here, and that's because I wanted to keep, at least I wanted to try and maintain the Nicol Bolas theme as much as possible, and still meet the standards that you would expect when sitting at a cEDH table. So we've gone with our Nicol Bolas based win cons instead of the Underworld Breach. If you wanted to upgrade the deck a little bit, you could definitely put the Underworld Breach in, but I wanted to have some delineation, some variation, from just the generic Grixis list, and so I thought it'd be fun to keep our Nicol Bolas win con. Moving on to the lands. Again, we are using a Tainted Pact mana base, and it's actually pretty easy to do in these 3 color decks, and really easy with the snow-covered lands. So we get an island plus a snow-covered island, swamp plus a snow-covered swamp, etc. We've got the Otawara Soaring City, just again a really good interaction activated ability that's really hard to deal with. Outside of like a deflecting swat or like a stifle or something, you don't really see too many stifles going around anymore, but you never know. And yeah, all of our lands are entering untapped at this point, producing multiple colors for us, off color fetches and all that good stuff, so we can make sure that we are playing our spells when we need to, and on time. Thanks for checking out this episode of Opal Wave MTG. Again, I'm your host Jacob, and until next time.